everybody. John is can I say veteran? Is that a good word? For
Yeah,
your
I
tenure at
believe
Tintri?
that works. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So John JD has been here 12 years. Is that right?
Yes.
So
January
that's
2012.
January 2012. So in the tech industry, that is a very long time. But in this case, it's the vast majority of the time that Tintri has been shipping product, if not almost all of it. So if there's anybody who knows all the different use cases that come about with this particular product, JD would probably be the right guy. And so for this particular session, we decided to take on something that he gets a lot in his area of the country and his customer base that he helps, and that is DevOps. So he's got some things that he wants to show, and I'm gonna learn a lot. I'm sure you're gonna learn a lot about how DevOps and Tintri work together very, very well. We don't have any basketball trivia, unfortunately. Maybe you guys can throw out funny basketball comments, but we didn't really have anything prepared as far as Geek Out madness goes. But I thought we would jump right into what John has to present us today. So John, if you want to do any further introduction, feel free, but take it away.
Sure. Thanks. Let's see. So, I've been working on this presentation, decided to actually skimp on my own introduction. I've just been a senior principal systems engineer here since 2012. I have seen a lot. I am curious of the folks that are out there, if you wouldn't mind raising your hands if you're currently doing DevOps in your environment and you're running a Tintri. It would be great to just see a hands up type thing. Let's do that first.
Yeah, so there's a little raise hand button on your Zoom for those of us that are dialing in on Zoom. And if you click that button, it'll raise your hand. Brian figured it out. So, hey, Brian.
Yeah.
So we got at least one doing DevOps, which is good.
Thanks, Todd.
So we might have more that maybe they can't find the button, but
gotcha.
Yeah.
And then I guess from the others okay, so we'll try one more just to see if people can figure it out. Are you running Tintri, or are you do you know anything about Tintri, or have you been, do you run it in your environment, or if you raise your hand, or is this just new to you and you just want to see what's going on?
So let's do raise your hand if you currently use Tintri. We've got at least one there. So Todd says respectable beard. I would say it goes way beyond respectable.
I do appreciate it.
I call it glorious. It's an amazing beard. Yeah. So Todd agrees with me. It's a true dad. So we've got a couple of hands that are raised that are Tintri people. So we got a few.
Okay. Yeah, so it just helps me as to what to talk about and how to talk about it, as far as what I can expect you might know or not know about what's going on. So I am going to drop off the participants screen. Steve, if you can sort of keep me in the loop as far as if anyone's doing anything there.
Of course.
So I wanted to talk about DevOps, and really, what is DevOps? I mean, it's actually a fairly active discussion point in a lot of things as far as the tech world goes these days. And generally, it's considered, a set of processes or procedures that are used to sort of combine developers and operation teams and their interactions, and to make things sort of functional in those environments. Oftentimes, if you get out of the DevOps situation, developers go off and do their things. They build things. They may do their, they do their coding. They may do their builds. Then that gets passed off to some other team that may have to deploy a test environment. And then if that passes, it goes on and does other things. With DevOps, typically we talk about sort of an integrated solution whereby folks have set up processes and procedures that allow you to basically build your product, or do your developer build. It'll actually kick off and say, okay, once you check in your code, it'll create a build. It'll then basically run it through a test suite. It may push that to another team or to another group that has to maybe deploy a bunch of VMs to install that on. It goes through some testing and comes out and gives us a pass-fail as to whether that update actually functioned, and can basically pass data back to the developer that says, yes, everything worked fine, or no, we missed on these tests. We need to redo that. But it then sort of goes through this whole flow of basically developing, building, deploying, and you may then even go into sort of put it into a test farm, put it into a production or a development farm, put it into a production, and move things through these stages. So a lot of times that's what we hear about when we talk about folks that are doing DevOps. Oftentimes this is in the CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous delivery. Again, that's sort of what I was talking about. I develop, I build. It basically gets an artifact created. Maybe it's an exe file that's going to go out, and that file then needs to get run in a bunch of desktops. And if a bunch of tests get run against that, if they pass, it moves on, it may become a candidate for other things. However, there are other folks that talk about DevOps as being something else. DevOps could be as simple as automating things that are in your environment. So my operations, from an operations perspective, I've decided to do things like set up a service portal. So I have an end user, they decide they need an environment. Let's say it has a file server, a Windows AD environment, another, an application server and a web server. I want those to get deployed very quickly. And so basically you run a process, it goes out, deploys those for you, presents them, and maybe it even goes and says you can have that for 3 days. And after 3 days, we're going to clean that up and take it away, or you can extend that. But all of that is basically, when we talk about DevOps, the sort of the options that are available out there. I guess I would be curious if others are thinking of other things when we talk about DevOps. If you want to throw that into a chat, if there's something else that you consider DevOps, it would be interesting to know what you're thinking. So why does it matter? The reason that folks are developing this is because it can allow for a very repeatable hands-off execution of tasks. So we get greater efficiency. We can see a lot of savings in time. When I manually don't have to go in and do something, it actually gets done for me. There are a lot less errors because we've actually scripted the deployments, and this actually allows for a lot more work to get done. And this is sort of my first story. I mentioned that I started back in 2012. It was January. I had to go down to our brand new sales training. I was the 5th SE that was brought into Tintri. And while I was there, I had to go do an install, come back to Seattle, do an install of a Tintri box. It was a Tintri T540. It was our first dual controller system. And in doing that, we basically came in, and the customer was running a CI/CD workflow. They basically did software development and testing. And they had been running on a different platform. So they had run this environment for a long time, and they were using a competitor that's fairly well known for NFS data storage. So we went into the environment and put a Tintri into the mix, and quite literally, again, an NFS data store, mount us up, very quick install. Our install was done in less than an hour. They had us mounted on there. They deployed the data store, put it into their environment. And after a week's time, we went back to chat with them to figure out what had happened. And they said, well, I don't know what you're doing with Tintri, but we basically have a test suite that we run. And while previously running on the other system, I could get, I'll say it's 1,000 test runs in the course of a day. By simply switching and putting a Tintri in instead of the competitive product. So that was the only change. We didn't add new CPU to the environment. We didn't do anything else. We just swapped out the storage. They were now able to get 3,000 test runs in that same period. the only difference being Tintri. Now, how do we do that? Well, for those of you that aren't running Tintri, I will share that the Tintri was built as a solution specifically for virtual workloads, and therefore we know about the VMs that are running on the Tintri box. We also did some interesting things from an NFS perspective in that we actually optimized the NFS protocol stack for working with hypervisors. There's a lot of stuff that we don't have to do because we're just presenting virtual disks basically to VMs. So there are a lot of things that we don't really care about. So when you look at the actual what's happening at an NFS level, we better utilize the network pipe to the system than what another storage array might. In fact, there was some work that was done and they looked at a protocol level and they actually looked at packets. They were doing packet sniffing and figured out that traditionally running NFS to, again, this competitive box vendor, they would roughly get about 45% of the packet was actually delivering data. The rest of it was sort of overhead. It was doing ACKs. It was doing a bunch of other stuff. When running on Tintri, we were getting better than 90% data per packet. So we literally, from an optimization of just the NFS stack, we were able to basically smoke this environment and literally triple their workload simply by swapping out the storage in the environment. So that was my first deployment. I've been on board for 2 weeks, and this is what I faced. And I was like, wow, this is truly incredible stuff, which is why I've been here for 12 years.
But I assume they bought the box.
They did buy the box, and
Okay.
about
If it
10
tripled
more
their
of them.
throughput, I would hope so.
Yeah, and then about 10 more of them. So
Awesome.
definitely a great story and a great thing, or a great experience for me. The other thing is these guys, I will say that we have sort of the easiest storage in the world to manage because you're not really doing storage. All you're doing is virtualization. And I guess we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, when we talk about DevOps as a topic, and when you read about DevOps, oftentimes you start hearing about things like GitHub, Jenkins, Ansible, PowerShell, Python, REST APIs, all kinds of things that go into building these pipelines. And so you can integrate a bunch of different things that actually help with that processing I was talking about earlier. You know, if I check in my my code into GitHub, it can actually generate an event that tells Jenkins to go out and build an environment to actually do an install. And Ansible might do the configuration of that. And within that, I might run a PowerShell script that does a bunch of stuff within the VMs or running Python to basically make that available. But so when I talk about Tintri, DevOps and Tintri, I'm not talking about that level of things in general. We do have a REST API into the Tintri. We also have a PowerShell toolkit and a Python SDK that allows these scripts to actually talk directly to the Tintri and take advantage of the Tintri goodness. But in all honesty, we're really a part of sort of that latter part of setting up an environment to do something with. We're not making Jenkins better, right? We're not making Ansible better. You develop scripts and stages within those that software to basically then deploy into a virtual environment that then talks to Tintri. And at that point, things get significantly better.
So we had a question come in from Lynn. How do these technologies integrate with existing DevOps tool chains and ecosystems, including version control systems, CI/CD pipelines, and container orchestration platforms? It sounds like that was kind of the last slide where you're saying there's a tool set here, right?
Yep.
And those tool sets are enabled, for the most part, by the Tintri technology that underlies it. Is that fair?
Exactly. So we are basically a resource or a location that I may talk to these environments. And so we're a resource that gets addressed by these different environments, basically, and talks to us. It's not a direct integration. Like I said, we don't have a direct integration to Jenkins, right? We don't have a direct integration into Ansible. Ansible can set up a playbook that says, I'm going to go out to a VM that's installed on the Tintri, and I'm going to do something to that. I'm going to configure that. I'm going to make changes to it. But what gets better is when you're deploying onto a Tintri, things get significantly better. And that's really when I was talking about the original, my example, like simply switching out the storage allowed them to deploy significantly faster and actually gave them better IOPS to actually do work faster in the environment, which allowed them to get a 3x increase in the amount of storage or in the amount of work that could be done and tests that could be done in their environment. So we are basically a piece that takes sort of that virtualization layer and then gives you better tools that you can do things with. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as the different things that we're able to do along the way. And so what is the Tintri advantage? Again, it's that piece that we're talking about. We basically have sort of an NFS, we're NFS or SMB based storage focused at the virtualization level or the VM. So deploying large scale CI/CD, if I have to deploy hundreds of VMs at a time, deploying that into a LUN can be actually really, really painful because oftentimes you're going to run into limits on how many VMs should run on a LUN to get the performance out of it. On a Tintri device, you literally just deploy into the data store, and we don't care, from 1 to up to 7,500 VMs into a data store, and you can just turn them on and start running them. We actually do a bunch of stuff under the covers to basically give you a QoS level for every VM that's running on it that allows us to do that kind of work very easily and to basically provide a lane for every VM to sort of run in so that we aren't stealing performance from existing VMs. But doing it on NFS or SMB3, because we do technically work with, we work with Hyper-V. We also work with, say, VMware. We work with Zen Server. That can be very beneficial as far as just the ease of deployment and the lack of management that it requires in order to do those things. Because the next thing that I say is that the ease of management. So ease of management is amazing when you start talking about storage. I come from the storage industry and I've done a lot of stuff in storage. With Tintri, there is no true storage management that you're doing. Essentially, you deploy a data store and you just deploy VMs into it. You're not carving up LUNs, creating iSCSI targets. You're not, managing all of that kind of stuff. So I have a customer, that's a fairly large customer of ours. We deployed our first VMstore into the environment, and it was actually a CI/CD work chain. Technically, it was a test dev work chain that they were doing. They were actually deploying 128 VM vApps into the storage. They would have to then stand that up, run their test, and blow away those VMs. Now, at the time, and again, this was back in 2014, they had tried to get this to run on everyone else's storage, and they could not get it to run because this ability to sort of deploy huge numbers of VMs very, very quickly and have that be available so that they could do what they needed to do just became untenable for most storage arrays. It just didn't work that well. With Tintri, it just worked. In fact, they actually hit a bug in VMware, in vCenter, where we were deploying VMs so fast that the vCenter choked on with the speed at which to actually register those VMs. So when we clone a VM, we create a clone, we actually register it into vCenter. You don't have to go out and find it and actually bring it into vCenter. We just clone it, register it into vCenter. It's available for you to do what you need to do. We actually hit a bug, that's been fixed at this point, but they were literally deploying 128 VApps or VM VApps at a time, just slamming it into the storage, and it basically broke everyone else. For Tintri, we just kept running. And I mean, they literally tested everyone at that point, and they could not get it to run in most environments, or it ran in a very degraded state. So as far as additional advantages, the ability to use offload drivers for cloning. If you're running in a vSphere environment and you have the VAI plugin installed, when we generate a clone within vSphere, it offloads that clone to Tintri, and we create it extremely quickly. So you're not going to go and copy files from one location to another directory. We just create it for you. Boom, it gets created very, very quickly. And I'm going to show you a demo of that real quick. And then, I'm just going to throw in one of the other primary advantages that we have are these Tintri snapshots and clones. It really is the secret sauce and what makes us so cool especially in DevOps. The clone instantiation is faster than any storage I've ever seen. I've never seen anyone that's able to do what we're able to do. And again, we do then register those clones with the hypervisors. Typically, the time that it takes, or the majority of time that it takes to actually create them is actually in the registering to the management plane. It's not the actual generation of the VM at the file level. It's the actual registering it to vCenter.
Yeah, I've seen that as well for several years. The instantiation of the registration itself is orders of magnitude longer than actually the cloning itself. So
exactly.
And I think you're going to show something like that here in a minute.
I am going to do that real quick.
Yeah.
So I am going to, let's see. No.
Always the challenge of flipping screens.
Exactly.
Into the demo environment.
Into the demo environment, exactly. So you are able to see still able to see my desktop at this point. Brand. So I will shift over and just show you sort of what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. So we're in our demo pod 3. This is the vCenter associated with it. I have demo pod 3 Tintri Global Center. Again, if you aren't working in a Tintri environment currently, Tintri Global Center allows us to basically deal with multiple VM stores within the same environment. And then gives me a view of what's going on within that environment, and down to the per VM level. Just a very quick overview. If we look at the overview pane of the VM, I can see, what I'm driving from a throughput perspective. Performance reserves is sort of a cool thing when you're deploying VMs. If you have available performance and you have available space, you pretty much know you can deploy VMs into the infrastructure. So we make that very simple. This performance thing, though, is interesting because in most traditional storage, you don't know when you're going to trip up the performance of that array. With Tintri, we actually give you a gas gauge. You can see what's going on. So again, it's just sort of a very quick overview for folks who aren't actually currently running Tintri, just to see sort of what is it that we see and what's in our interface. So if I go back to the managed objects, and we're talking about DevOps. So one of the things that's important with DevOps is the ability to script and make changes to your environment or to do things via script, because again, we want to automate this as much as possible. Now, I am not a developer, without a doubt. Please don't even, I am a hack at best. I can modify scripts, I can look at things and try to make things work or make changes, but I am not a developer. So I don't have the full CI/CD workflow that's sort of going through here. I'm going to show you some scripts, or at least show you some examples of things that we can do to make things interesting and easier for an environment. So again, we go into vSphere, and I'm going to be playing a couple of games here so that we can see what's going on. So I've got this script. I am going to run this so we can see this is the version of I'm running PowerShell in this environment, and I'm actually running this in VS Code currently. If you watched the last Tintri Geek Out, Sean Myers showed you some of this, basically running VS Code with the PowerShell plugin into it, connecting into Tintri. So same kind of things apply here. If you've run PowerShell, you may run into, or if you haven't run PowerShell, but you want to, PowerCLI is the VMware PowerShell module. I will say that setting this configuration to ignore invalid certificates, if your environment doesn't have great certificates in your as far as connections, doing this makes life significantly easier. So that basically when it connects, it doesn't basically bog out and say that it's not going to do what it needs to do. I am going to run this real quick.
Yeah, we have a lab, so we don't go too crazy on the certification or certificate stuff. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. This is allowed. Sorry, I need to shift. It's not there. All right. And then, so I am actually already connected to vCenter in this environment. Typically, you would run this connect vCenter user, and then you can do an import of the Tintri PowerShell toolkit into the environment. So this is just doing a quick, it's bringing in our commandlets into the environment, and then I connect to a Tintri server. I can show you here. So if you're seeing this, I have this run selection. I'm not actually running the full script. I'm just running this script one step at a time to make it a little bit easier for you to see what's actually happening. So if I run that, oh,
You might have to
so
re-import the toolkit.
I absolutely am.
Mm-hmm.
So we will do
By the way, the
that.
toolkit's available on our support site for those of you who do have Tintri in your environment. Just
Yep.
look in the download section and you can grab it.
Great. And we'll just up our here.
Todd says uh-ohs are bad. Yeah, we here on the show we call them demo gremlins, and
right.
they hit us a lot. So
they do unfortunately hit us more often than what we want.
yes, always the case.
I am actually going to do the connection. I'm going to do this connect as well. Unfortunately, I have a bunch of PowerShells up and running, and I never remember which one I've actually done stuff in. Oh, so it didn't. Okay.
And no, his password is not a cuss word. At least I don't think it is. But
no, not this one.
You never know.
I am from New Jersey.
Yeah.
So
okay, that looks better.
So I did grow up with yeah. There may be certain things that come out occasionally that can be interesting.
That's all right. We could always bleep them out. Not a big deal.
Exactly. No,
Just be you.
I will try to be better than that. So let's come here. Let's do a connect to Tintri server. Shoot. I did a control V instead of a control C.
You could probably do
Leap
Control
out
Z.
of,
That'll
yeah,
revert it, right? Yeah.
there
you
we go.
Yeah, Laura says bleep out obscene language with uh-oh. Yeah, that might be instead of doing the beep thing, that's a possibility. We could just put in some sort of a sample of us saying uh-oh. That's a possibility.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. There was an old Windows tool that was like that. I forget what it was, but it would do that when there was an error. That's like Windows 95 days. Yeah, so there's the certificate stuff. So like I said, most of the things in our lab are self-signed. So
Exactly.
okay, this looks better.
This does look better. Okay. So I'm going to have to do better too. All right. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting a couple of variables.
So
Actually,
that put the
look at
output of
your
that command into $VM.
correct.
So what's $VM?
So what is $VM? This is basically a VM object from Tintri. Now I can actually do the same thing from the PowerShell toolkit. I will get a PowerShell, or sorry, a PowerCLI toolkit, and I will get a PowerCLI VM object, and I can actually use them interchangeably as I need to do things. But in this case, I'm just going to pull it from Tintri. I'm also going to create a host resource. And this is I'll do another jar. So we can see what that is. Essentially, this is the display name of DP3 cluster. So this is the VM, or sorry, the vCenter in the environment. And what I then want to do is do a clone many. Now, when I do this, I'm actually going to clone 500 VMs. It has a base VM name. So when I clone it, it's going to be a clone of $VM, which is this tingle. I'm going to create 500 of them. I'm going to call them jd-demo-cm for clone many. And I just want to use the latest snapshot for it. And I'm going to use the host resource of that we showed, or that I showed earlier. Basically, it's just going to go into vCenter in this environment. So if I do,
So the get latest snapshot is interesting, but in a typical CI or CD environment, you may want to use like a gold image of some kind. So it would be a named
exactly
snapshot that you took intentionally.
previously,
Right.
exactly. So
Right.
yeah, and we'll sort of talk about that a little bit. I have some examples of that. I didn't actually script that part, but I will show you that, and that you may want to take snapshots at strategic times of creating your images to do certain things and make life easier in your environment. Let's see how this goes. So I'm doing a clone many, and let me go back to vCenter and let's see. Seeing my task. Are the gremlins getting me?
It's thinking about doing something.
Okay. It may just be working on it. There we
There
go.
we go. Now you're going to see all these VMs pop up.
Right.
Your scroll
So
bar just got very small.
yes, it did. So
And there they are.
if I come in here and do a search, sorry, up above, that, JD dash,
They basically all just got dumped into the root of the cluster.
they did,
Yeah, they're all there.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, as you can
yeah,
see
you'll
there's
notice,
432, 228. Yeah, they're all there.
right. And so from
Yeah.
an all results, basically, I've created 500 VMs. I've dumped them all into the root of the system. They're all based on this name, based on this name. And, but literally in less than a minute, right? It hasn't been a minute since I kicked off that script. I now have 500 VMs in vCenter that allows me to do something with. That to me is pretty impressive, quite honestly. The fact that I can generate that many VMs that quickly. So if I needed to, I could do that, or I could create a clone of, I could create however many that I need, but get them as quickly as possible and then run additional scripts that go out and change them or do whatever I need to do with them. Now, one of the things that, you never necessarily want to do in a lab environment is do exactly what I just did, dump 500 VMs into an environment. So what I'm
There's
going to
probably a script for
do,
that.
there actually is a script for that. Go figure. So what I'm going to do is come out and create another environment variable. And this time I'm using get VM, not get Tintri VM. So this is actually the PowerShell equivalent of get VM. And I just say run it.
So
Now,
that's going to create a 500 element array
correct, of
of those
VMs.
VMs. Yep.
Exactly.
So if you did a dollar del VM, it'd be a long response.
Exactly. And I'll just do it just for fun. Why not?
Why not?
Dollar del VM.
A lot of VMs.
A lot of VMs sitting out in that environment. Now, I happen to know that I haven't turned on these VMs. Typically, I would go in and say, shut down this VM, the VMs that are on there, and then say, let's remove them. And selecting the confirm false says I don't have to come in and actually say anything. I don't have to agree to it. And the dash delete permanently actually takes them off of disk. So if I just did a delete, it would just take them out of inventory. Doing it this way, I'm going to actually take them off of disk.
And because there are database calls involved on the vCenter side, this can take a little bit of time because it generally creates a task for every one of them. So you're
Right.
queuing up 500 tasks, and that database has to be able to keep up with it. So,
Right. But as you see, I've just gone to 464, 431. So I'm very quickly deleting these out of the environment. And again, that is the other thing that happens in, CI/CD environments, especially if you're doing a lot of, say, test dev, or you're deploying a whole bunch of things and you need to then get rid of them as well. So the ability to both deploy very quickly and remove it very quickly can be very helpful and can actually make things go a lot easier in your environment. Now, I told you about that first environment or the first sort of, or no, the second one, the CI/CD environment, the dev test environment where they were deploying 128 VMs at a time. That was great. And, at one point about, 5 years late, or no, say 3 years later, I was talking to them. I was trying to figure out, how things were going in the environment. This was actually a very old VMstore. It was one of our T650s, believe it or not. And at the time, they were deploying and destroying 60,000 VMs a week. So basically 10,000 VMs a day on a T6050. in order to do what they needed to do. So again, if we come through and we look, still deleting VMs. So I was speaking to the same customer. They have upgraded gear at this point. They have basically 3 environments that are doing similar workloads. Again, it's primarily, this is sort of, I've built an application. I now need to test it in these very large environments. They're currently, again, they swapped this one environment out. They're now doing 50,000 VMs a day.
Jeez.
And in the other 2 environments, they're deploying, they're basically doing 20,000 and 30,000 a day. So on a daily basis, they create and destroy 100,000 VMs in this company.
So Todd thinks you're lying. Unfortunately, Todd, he's not lying.
I am not telling lies.
Yeah.
I can honestly tell you that is the truth.
Yeah. I've seen the dial home data for this particular customer.
Yeah.
And it's pretty ridiculous, actually.
What they do. The interesting thing when you look at the dial home data is you get a snapshot of a point in time. So you never know how many are actually going to be on the VM store at any one point in time because they've created and deleted. So it's whatever's actually active at any one point in time. Basically, that's 2 a.m. that, they basically we get the data from a single point in time and away it goes. So one thing I did want to point out too, if we go back to my script, one of the things that we're able to do, and actually we'll do so
while you're doing that, Laura is really geeking out. So she thinks the uh-oh sound was from an old FTP. I think she's right. I think it was WSFTP, if you remember that little tool. And when something would fail, it would go, uh-oh, like that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. We should sample that.
Yeah, we
should. If you do have to bleep something out, we can use that sample.
That sounds great.
Laura says yes, she's validating. That was the program. Yes.
Nice.
Yep, that was it. See, we have the smartest audience on the web.
The thing that so way back in the day when I first moved up to the Seattle area and first started getting into tech, I was actually working for a company. I was running a help desk, and we ran on Unix, so we actually ran on AIX. And the thing that I always loved on AIX is if you went into their configurator and you actually tried to process a configuration and it failed, they had this running man, and you would just see this man running like it was a fake, like black or red, the image of a man running across the screen. But when it failed, he went face first into the ground. It was the best thing in the world. You would just see, all of a sudden, you'd see like the hands are back, the heels are back over his head. It was just the greatest thing.
Face planting.
Not that I ever wanted it to fail. Yeah, not that I wanted it to fail, but that was the best.
That's great.
Thanks.
Makes me want to try AIX just to see if I can get it to break.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. I'm sure there's an animation of that somewhere.
I'm sure there is. Yeah, actually, I should go look for it. Sorry. Typing is not my Tintri VM.
Clone many?
Clone many. Tintri.
Is
it Tintri VM clone many?
Sorry.
Yeah, Tintri VM clone.
Yeah, it's line 19 of your script at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
So yeah, if you're looking at the help within PowerShell, again, don't know how folks work in PowerShell. There are some interesting things that can be done. And if you use it, one of the things I use all the time is get help, your PowerShell script. Go into examples directly allows us to see what are some examples of runs that have been done for it, and you'll notice that mine looks semi-similar to what we're looking at here. One of the things that was interesting when I started looking at is we actually started creating we have another PowerShell script that allows you to generate a sequence, a name sequence. And so last night I was, playing with my examples here, and I'm used to what we saw just previously, where I can create 100 or create 500 VMs typically in less than a minute. So I run this, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to run this sequence. So I can create a sequence which basically uses this Tintri VM name sequence. I'm not going to do 500 because what I figured out is that if I use this Tintri VM name sequence, it basically does them one at a time. So when I generate the sequence, it does my cloning, but it does my clone one clone at a time instead of boom, dropping them on there. It's cool if I want to go in there and actually modify the way things look. And here I will.
In terms of a naming convention and a numbering scheme and all that kind of stuff. Right. Yep.
However, you are going to pay the price a little bit as far as the actual performance of it. So this is going to go out. I'm going to create a sequence. I'm going to prefix it with jddemo.cm. I want 6 digits to fill in there. I'm going to increment with a step value of 1, but I only want to create 20 of them. And I actually am going to add a suffix to it, and I actually want to start at 1. So here, just hit enter. And now I will create, or I'll look at $sequence. Oh, shoot. And it essentially comes in and says, shows some information about the sequence. But now I actually want to go in and use that sequence to generate my my VMs. And again, this is it's a clone many process, but as we look at this, we'll start seeing that things are a little more interesting. Well, I shouldn't even say that, but ultimately successfully added 1 clone to vCenter inventory.
Yes, it's doing one at a time, as you
clone
said.
to vCenter. So it's basically doing this one at a time. And if I go back to do my search, we start seeing the VMs adding into it, but still my JD demo, I've got 6 digits. I have DO at the end of it. But as I do this, what I figured out is it's basically taking about 6 seconds of VM to generate. And depending on what I'm trying to do and what I want to do, this might be fine. Like if it's more important for me to do this. But one of the things when you're doing continuous CI/CD is oftentimes you're looking for ways to optimize your environment. And one of the things I figured out is, if I really cared about how fast these were deployed, doing that name sequence wasn't really going to help me. It was actually going to hinder me. And that's one of the things that, I always recommend when people are doing CI/CD to at least consider, right, when you're doing things, because there are ways, depending on what you're working with, to optimize your workflow. And one of the things that that oftentimes happens, I'll actually, yeah, I'll do it. I'll jump back to, sorry, come on. There we go. I'll jump back to the presentation that I was doing. So one of the other advantages is the ability to do sort of SyncVM. So Tintri has a product called SyncVM, and it's based on data management. But it's based on the fact that I've got snapshots. So I generate a snapshot whenever I want to do things. We might look at things and see, like, we create a workflow that says, I'm going to create a bunch of VMs from a gold image. I'm going to add an install package to it. I'm going to just deploy that package. I'm going to run the test suite, and then I'm going to delete the VM. Now, in a lot of cases, what people will do is they will create a virtual machine or create a bunch of virtual machines. And then within the virtual machine, they'll go out to a file server and they'll download the package that they actually want to install. Now, one of the things I'll tell you is that if you've got 100 VMs that are all downloading the same package, you're generating a lot of network traffic that's probably not required. So one of the things that you could do to optimize this would be to create a virtual machine and then actually add a new disk that actually has the package to it. And I could add that disk to each of them. And then I can create, I can go to my gold image, create a clone of that, add the VM, basically on, say, a second disk, say a data drive, I could add the package that needs to be installed. And from there, I could clone all of the VMs. And now, instead of having to pull all that data, in the speed that it took for me to do that cloning operation that I just showed you, I can have the VM with all of the data that it needs already associated with it, and it can basically continue on and run the script. So it can basically go into itself and run the script off of, say, the E drive, and boom, we can come up and continue running without actually having to take the time to transfer that over the network or do any of that kind of stuff. So the ability to optimize and do things in a way that basically makes life better and easier for you is really important in a CI/CD workload or dev test workload, because everywhere that I can shave time off, I can basically get more of that work done. So let's escape out of here. And
Yeah,
I'm
even
going to
these
do
very small slices of time, when you multiply them by hundreds of thousands a week or millions a month, right?
right
That adds up very, very quickly.
very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's why I always like to talk about doing, when we talk about DevOps, it's all about optimizing. It
Mm-hmm.
really is. Now, normally I would come out here and I would run my cleanup script again, but I'm not actually going to do that. Oh yeah, so I've got 20 VMs. The 20 VMs that I said I was going to create in that sequence, it came out and created them. Like I said, it seems to take about 6 seconds a VM in order to make that happen. But it is what it is. It's fine.
But
So if
six
I go to
seconds time a million may not work, right?
exactly, that is
Right.
exactly
So that's the
the
what you're
thing. And
balancing.
exactly. So depending on what you're getting out of it, you may find that there are other ways to do that or to change it depending on what you're trying to do. And it's interesting because we will occasionally get, say, support cases from a customer that's running CI/CD, and they say, well, things are running slowly. And I always go back to look, where can we optimize? Because it may be something that we have a VM store, and the array that we're actually running does inline dedupe and compression. So when I'm doing inline dedupe and compression, that means I actually need to build pointers to anything that's similar. If I have 100 VMs that are streaming the exact same data between them and it's coming onto the Tintri VMstore, when I do that, I actually increase the rate of dedupe in the ingest stream, and that can actually add performance latency into our environment. Whereas if I just go in and add the data first, then clone the VMs, I don't have that ingest stream, and I've now saved huge amounts of space and reduced the latency in the environment. So you do have to work with the tools that you have, and all tools have different limitations based on what they're doing and what's happening in the environment. That just is what it is. So we have 5 minutes. I'm going to try and
Yes.
do this demo very, very quickly. It's a SyncVM demo. It's not the slickest thing in the world, but I want to show it anyway. So what do I have open? Okay. Who is this? Is Win2. I want to go in and look at my files. I look at this PC. Sorry, and I have an E drive. And you'll notice that there's no data that's actually on my E drive here, right? So I've gone in and I've essentially, I created a gold image, which is a Windows install. I added an additional drive to each one of those, and initially they're empty. However, if I go and look at this image and I go to my E drive, I've got this install.me.txt file that's sitting on my E drive. This is a different VM, right? This is JDWin 2020 or 22. This is DevOps Win2. One of the cool things I can do with Tintri is that I can, if I go to Win2 and I say options, or sorry, actions, and I say, I actually want to refresh the virtual disks, right? The question it's asking me is, where do I want to refresh this from? So what I'm able to do is go out and choose a VM. And in this case, I want JD -win 22. And I only want to swap out the IDE drive. So again, I'm on DevOps demo Win2. I'm going to go to JD Win22 and I'm going to pull a snapshot. I'm actually going to pull this new file snapshot. Again, I identified my snapshot with a term so that I could actually find it. And then I say, I'm going to refresh that disk. Now, on Windows, by default, we're actually going to have to shut down that VM. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm dropping the disk that's currently connected to the VM, and I'm connecting it to a clone of the disk from that other VM. So if I go back to shoot. Yeah, this isn't happening fast enough. I apologize. Oh, no. Inventory. If I go back here and I say I want to launch my web console again, DevOps Win 2020, send it a Control-Alt-Delete.
And let's see what's in the E drive.
Let's just hope.
I always cancel that.
Lie to you.
I don't want to tell it why I did it.
And the demo yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Hey, look at that.
There it is. So again, it would be more interesting if it was actually running a batch file that actually installed a bunch of stuff and did something. But this is an example of what you're able to do. So it might be that deploying brand new VMs each time doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe I deploy some VMs, I actually go in and change specific characteristics about them. And then the next time I need it, instead of having to deploy all new, I actually go back to the existing set of VMs, swap out the data, do a new install, or I can actually refresh those VMs back to their original state, swap out the data, and boom, we can go back to this. So again, I'm just talking about, these are steps that, and if you use the Tintri that you can take advantage of, that might make your environment go faster, do some easier things, and to be able to get up to 50,000 VMs a day if that's what you actually need to do.
And the size of this data is irrelevant. So it's the contents of that drive, regardless of how much of that disk is populated with data.
Yes, and the other
Yeah.
thing is that it actually does not take up any new data. So I have a
Mhm.
copy of it that's a zero copy clone. It takes up no additional space on the drive when I do that. So I think we're right at the top of the hour. If there are any questions, Steve, I'm not sure how you give away the switch.
So we pull the name after this is over. So just
Okay,
those of you on the line, just watch your email. We'll contact you if you're the winner. If you're not the winner, sorry, you're not the winner. Apologize
apologize.
in advance. Um, but hey, listen, thanks, JD. I learned a lot today. I always learn a lot when you're on the line with us. So we appreciate you joining us. We do have, just as a note, we do have a separate Geek Out. If you go back to the Tintri website under Experience and then Geek Out, there's one that we did specifically on the refresh function. So if you want to do a little deeper dive into that function, we talked about that, I'd say 6 months ago or so. So you can go back and look at that. But thanks everybody for joining, and watch your email for the next Geek Out that we're going to be doing in the near future. And JD, thank you thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we will see you all next time. Thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Have a great day.